Welcome to the Small Church Podcast, the podcast for church leaders who want to make a difference in their communities. We're your hosts, Tony Marr and Bruce Montgomery, and we're excited to be with you today. On this podcast, we'll be discussing the latest trends, strategies, and ideas for effective leadership in small-sized churches. So whether you're a pastor, a ministry leader, or a volunteer, this podcast is for you. Each week, we'll bring you interviews with experienced church leaders who have valuable insights to share. We'll also explore topics like team building, community outreach, spiritual growth, and much more. So if you're looking for practical advice and inspiration to help you lead your church with excellence, you've come to the right place. The Small Church Podcast is brought to you by Higher Ministries. Higher Ministries is an organization that exists to help Christian leaders in the churches they serve through coaching and consulting, all for little or no cost. For more information on Higher Ministries or to find out more about the Small Church Podcast, please visit higherministries.com. Thanks for tuning into this week's edition of the Small Church Podcast. Well, good morning. Welcome to this edition of the Small Church Podcast. My name is Tony Marr, and I'm here with my co-host and good friend, Bruce Montgomery, and we are glad that you are with us today. Bruce, we're sitting here live or semi-live at Aunt B's with our pancakes, our waffles, our biscuits and gravy, our bacon, our eggs, and our smoke.
Yeah. It's that biscuits and gravy that gave me diabetes, so I know exactly where I got it, at this table at Aunt B's with you and your dad and with other people that we would bring in to talk to. We began this whole process just talking about church and the needs of church, and out of that we ended up having an organization that we've created, or Tony and John, his dad, and I created, and it's a ministry to help churches succeed and help ministers to succeed. And today we're going to talk about small church leadership.
Yeah, so with our podcast, the Small Church Podcast, which, Bruce, we launched this last week. This is our second episode. Last week, we got live on all of the major podcast platforms, and so listeners out there can find us on Apple Podcasts, on Amazon Music, on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts. If there's another podcast platform that you like to use, drop us a line and we'll be sure to add it there if we're not already there. Bruce, we want to welcome all of our guests that tuned in last week, which I think was me. I tried to get my wife to listen to our first episode last week, and I don't even think that she ever listened to it. So I think that we had a whopping listener audience of about 3. And that was me listening to it twice and you probably once.
Yeah, I got into it and got confused, so I worked my way through it. I've not done a lot of podcasts, and I did make it all the way through. So we have at least 3 listeners, and just thinking about you right now, you might be number 4, and we would love to get to know you and share with you. We're just excited about the church, but we're also frightened.
Yeah,
because I think small churches are characteristic, maybe 150 members in attendance, but they're also characteristic, I think, of living in an attitude of atmosphere of fear. They're fearful that they'll make a mistake. They're fearful that they'll offend somebody. They're stuck in the mud and afraid sometimes to take a step out to change anything.
Yeah, I agree. Bruce, we've had the opportunity to work with lots of small churches through our work with Higher Ministries. We've had the honor and privilege to serve in interim ministry capacities, to consult with numerous small churches. And the point of this podcast is to bring a resource to small church leadership that maybe they don't otherwise have. There are literally thousands of podcasts out there, hundreds and hundreds of podcasts on church leadership, but so many of the things that are discussed, talked about, and brought up, a lot of the resources and ideas that are talked about in these podcasts are things that are just outside of the realm of possibility for many churches. They don't have the resources, they don't have the time, they don't have the ability, they don't have the leadership to do or accomplish many of the things that are talked about on some of these other books, church leadership books and leadership shows and podcasts. And so what we wanted to do with the Small Church Podcast is create a place, create a venue where we talk with other small church leaders and church ministry experts in the realm of small church leadership to really bring a resource to small churches and their leaders to give them practical input, practical advice, and a sounding board for the unique circumstances that meet those churches and those leaders. Last week, we very briefly touched on what this podcast was going to be about. And in our 3 listens over the course of the week, we saw that before we dive in depth into some of those topics and bring in the many guests that we're going to have over the course of the next several weeks and months, that we needed to dive into a little bit deeper, take a deeper dive into exactly what we're going to cover in this podcast over the course of the hopefully next several years. And so today, what we want to do is, instead of diving headfirst into the deep end with guests and deep topics, we're going to kind of do an overview from 30,000 feet. We're going to do a flyby of what you can expect over the next couple of weeks and months from the Small Church Podcast, what you can be looking for as we dive deep. But today we wanted to kind of take that overhead view from 30,000 feet and understand what it is that we're hoping to accomplish and provide with the Small Church Podcast.
Yeah, I kind of see it as a continuing education thing for ministers and for church leaders, and especially in a smaller church where they don't have the budget to send them off somewhere. We bring that information to them and can work with them, and we can actually tailor some things to do to different congregations if we get somebody to talk with us and to share their things. But one of the things we have to think about is leadership. If you don't have leadership, you remind me of my grandmother when I was younger. She was a farm gal, so she would have chickens, and those chickens were my pets until it came time for dinner. And then she would just stomp on their heads and pull the head off, and the body ran around until it died. And I think that Christ is the head of the church, but we need to have those who take Christ's message to the church, to the body, so it stays alive and is moving forward. I guess that metaphor would work for us, because that's what we want to do. We're top down. We want to work with the elders and the preachers of churches to help them become more functional and vital.
Bruce, do you need to spend some time today talking through the emotional scars that you're still dealing with from your pet chickens having their heads cut off and running around? How many thousands of dollars have you spent trying to process through and work through the emotional ramifications of witnessing your beloved chicken running around the yard with its head cut off?
Probably thousands of dollars, but more. I no longer eat chicken. I am a beef person right now, and trying to break away from that to the other things I can get into takes a lot of hot sauce.
So, Bruce, before we can really dive into some of these topics, I think that we need to give our listeners an understanding of what we mean when we say small church leadership and a small church. What is a definition of a small church for reference sake moving forward with this show?
I would say, we've said it a couple of times, a church that averages about 150 members, I mean, that's attending, is considered still a small church. And really it's not. And 60-80% of the congregations in America are in this size
Fall
group.
into that category.
They fall into this category. So you're not, if you're in a church that size, you're not the aberration. You're the norm.
You're the norm. Yeah.
The mega church is a whole new animal and a whole new thing that's come on the scene, and it is entirely different and operates entirely differently. If you're in a smaller church, you're going to have hands-on with things. You're going to be working face-to-face with a group of elders or a group of leaders and trying to figure out how to go. You may have limited resources and find ways to get around that. You may even sometimes be in an existence where you are fearful. You're thinking about what's going to happen if we don't get this done, or if we lose this family, or we don't get this family. And I found myself the first years of ministry, and it was a small church. We were about 150 or so at that time. I focused on people who weren't there. I was sat there in the front of the sanctuary while the worship service is going on, and looking, what did I do to offend that person? Why isn't that person here? And taking it personal when somebody wasn't there, and not
Which is
realizing.
easy to do when you have such a small congregation. You notice the people who aren't there. When you're a larger church, you probably don't notice as much the people who aren't there on a week-to-week basis. I think some of the characteristics of small church is a lot of these guys and men and women that are in leadership in these small churches, because of the lack of resources, because of the lack of leadership in their church, that they're forced to take on a much greater role than what they maybe
Right.
originally thought they were going to do. And so they have to wear a lot of different hats. You're doing the preaching, you're doing the teaching, you're doing the pastoral care, you're doing the administrative duties, you're the finance person, you're the landscaper, you're taking on all of the different roles, you're cleaning the church a lot of times, you're making sure that everything is printed and ready to go for Sunday. You're the program director. You're wearing so many different hats that this type of leadership in a small church often requires a more hands-on approach in a day-to-day, hour-to-hour, minute by minute. You've always got something going on, and it can be overwhelming.
Right. One of the things I see in that what you're talking about there, Tony, is that there's a tendency to do all these things yourself. Nobody else gets to help. Nobody else gets to have the joy of service and joy of things, and you're feeling overloaded. And so one of the first things I would say, any leader in a small church, find how to delegate. Get somebody who can do that church bulletin if that's what you're going to have, and get things done. Get somebody who's going to do a newsletter. Get somebody who can help you with the hospital calls. Don't try to do it all yourself. If you do, you're going to end up in a loony bins, I think, somewhere, because your health's going to deteriorate and everything else, and you're taking away the joy.
But I think that's a reason why we see statistically most Christian leaders, most vocational pastors or ministers, the average ministry life expectancy, not physical life expectancy, but ministry life expectancy of a seminary and Bible college graduate is less than 5 years. And so we spend all of these resources to train and educate our ministers. They graduate from Bible college or seminary. They get their first placement, oftentimes in a small church, which we'll talk a lot about in a later episode. And then they're completely out of ministry for good within 5 years, doing something completely unministry related. And I think it's because of all those different hats that they have to wear and the difficulty that it can be in attracting and retaining volunteers. And so in a subsequent episode, we're going to have people on that have done an incredible job of both finding, attracting, and retaining volunteers to help with those things, like church bulletins and PowerPoint presentations and lawn care at the church, because so often the church, especially the small church, views their minister as an employee. So we have hired you to do this job, and here's your job description of all the things that you're required to do. And so when you come and ask us to do something, that's what we're paying you to do. And that can become overwhelming. And I think that it's one of the common challenges that small church leaders face is not only do they have limited financial resources, but it can be really difficult to attract and retain not only their volunteers, but even their members.
Mm-hmm. Expectations, I think, are a major problem. And when you go into a congregation, defining roles, defining what's going to happen, I think early on helps, so that people know that you're not in it by yourself, that you're willing to work with people. When I was talking to churches about preaching to them over the years, one of the things I told them is, I'll do anything with you, but I'll not do anything for you.
That's great.
Because if I do it for you, then I'm going to take over everything. And you're not going to have the joy of serving. We're not going to have the growth that takes place when people do take responsibility for things. It's all going to be on, and I'm going to feel like everything's on my shoulders, and it's not healthy. One example of that and the expectations of people, I was sharing with Tony earlier. One church I served, I like to go out and meet people. I hug people and talk to people and go through, and I even go down to pews if I can before the service begins. And one Sunday, I was doing just that, and somebody came and grabbed me because somebody had come to the church wanting food, and so I went off to talk to this person, and I never got back to where I was. Later that day, I got a phone call, and the question was, "Are you mad at Mom?" And I thought, "What? What are you talking about?" I said, then I
'Cause you
realized,
didn't talk
oh,
to her.
she's the last person that I didn't in the line that I was going to talk to, and I didn't get to her, and she felt like I slighted. They felt like I slighted her, and I really hadn't. I got pulled away for something that I didn't really want to do anyway, but I had to
You
do
made
that.
Mama mad.
Yeah, it made Mom mad.
And you don't want to make Mama mad.
No. I don't want Mama or my wife mad.
Bruce, we've got a church that we're working with right now that I think ties right along with the story that you just told from your experience, and also with this idea of the multiple hats that small church leaders have to wear. That we were talking with a church that we just recently put a new minister in place there, and was talking with one of their elders about how the new minister was doing. He said, "Oh, he's incredible. We love his sermons. We love the way that he's guiding us and leading us. Just wish that he would spend some more time on Sunday mornings shaking hands and meeting people." And it's one of those things that in a larger church, that's not typically the responsibility of the lead pastor, of the senior minister. You have a greeting team in place. You have other people, and the minister can just focus on getting themselves emotionally, mentally, spiritually right to teach their congregation. But in a small church, you're the greeter, you're the welcome committee, you're the handshaker, you're the roll taker, that all of those hats fall on you. And because typically in most small churches, the lead pastor is the only pastor, um, you're looked to wear all of those different hats, and people are looking to you to fill all of those different responsibilities.
Yeah, it's a hard task to think about, but you do need to get out and meet people and see people and talk to people and be a greeter, but you need to have teams of people who do that. Again, it's a matter of enlisting help. Farmers know if they're a dairy farmer, they even know their cows by name, and they know what stall they're going to go to. They know their farm animals. They know their farm. They know how to handle their crops, and they do those kind of things, and they're right there every time something happens. As you move on, you're going to have other people take those places. And we're going to talk about those kind of leadership changes from being a farmer to being like a rancher. And these are not unusual terms. These are terms that are often used. And a rancher knows all the animals and does those things, but he's not always there all the time. He delegates. He has other helpers going to do things, and including hospital visits. Make hospital visits, but usually, for most of my ministry, I've gone in, and unless it's critical, I haven't stayed the whole time with them. I prayed with them, made sure they got in it, or they were calmed down, and talked with them. And then I moved on to doing something else the rest of the day that had to be done. And I think that's one of the things, you have to be a multitasker.
Yeah. Bruce, one of the big things that we're going to talk about over the course of the life of this podcast is how to build a strong foundation for small church leadership. We'll have numerous episodes and guests that will come and speak to this, but I wanted you and I to just take a few minutes and kind of talk about some of the basics on that, on building a strong foundation for small church leadership, and obviously not just with small churches, but with any church and any organization. It all starts with the importance of your vision and your mission.
And it also is important how you communicate that vision and mission. That's communication here at this point is critical. How are you communicating your vision, and are you living that vision and carrying it out? So the purpose of the vision is to lead us and to guide us to what we do and how we behave.
Yeah, I think most churches have a vision statement or a mission statement that they put on their website or they put on the front of their church bulletin. But if you were to ask even the staff or elders of the church, much less the people who attend the church, what their mission statement is, I don't know that many could say what it is or how they're living that out. And so It's great to have a vision statement, a mission statement, but is it the lifeblood of your church? Is it your organizational logic for how you're achieving what you're trying to do? Is everything that you do being filtered through that mission statement and that vision statement? And that comes through, the only way that happens is through having effective communication strategies.
And it's hard. It honestly is hard to do what Tony just said, to look through the filters of what you're doing and see that whether it's mission statement or not. And if you're not doing that, sometimes you can begin to expand further and further and further and further away until your vision statement, mission statements, like your bylaws. And I hopefully never see a church bylaws. I don't like those. But we need to make sure our people see, and we see almost daily, the vision and mission that we're going on to in a church. If we don't, then we're easily led astray. So suddenly somebody's need becomes not just their need, but a passion for everything, and it pulls away finances, it pulls away time, it pulls away attention, and you begin to lose. Early in the ministry, I told Tony this morning, early in the ministry, I sat in church as church was going on, looking around at the empty spots in the pews, saying, "Who did I offend this week, and why aren't they here?" I just saw them. They should, the whole idea of taking personal responsibility when they're not there. That's God's spot. My spot was just to proclaim and teach and help them and love them, and it's God's spot to take care of the other things. And so don't try to be him.
Yeah. Bruce, I think one of the biggest frustrations that many small church pastors have, we've touched on this a little bit already today, is it foundational for small churches to have strong leadership? That without strong leadership, the church really isn't going to go anywhere. And many church leaders feel like they are on an island. And a lot of the churches that we work with, a lot of the churches that we've had the opportunity to visit and step into, there's just a void of leadership in the church. But if you're already in a small church, right, if you have a lack of leadership in your church, telling them, well, you need to develop a great leadership team, that's a daunting task, and one that can not only feel overwhelming, but feel impossible. And so one of the things that we're going to dive into a lot in this podcast is how you can form a strong leadership team that doesn't necessarily have to come from within your own church. That your leadership team can be people that you rely on, that are maybe other pastors, elders from other churches, even people from other churches or from your community with a specific skill set or specific experiences that can help you in your leadership of your church and help your church as a whole without even being members or attenders of your church.
Right. I know one of the things we've talked about over the years, Tony, is getting ministers and church leaders to get together in groups, and not just within their congregation, but across the congregation, and have times where they sit down and talk about their church or talk about the things that are going on for them, and getting insights from other people. It's not a bad idea to talk to people and ask them for advice in certain areas, and also not a bad idea to share skills that you have. If you have a skill in doing something, say you have a skill in putting out PowerPoint, and somebody else wants to use PowerPoint or Prezi, you could help them learn that, and they can help you do something else.
Just as you're looking for others to help you, maybe you can be that help to someone else. Mm-hmm. I think that's a great insight, Bruce. One of the things that we're going to be talking a lot about that we hope to accomplish with this podcast is not only spending time talking about philosophical ideas for small church leadership and small church growth, but actually giving practical and attainable strategies for how you can better lead and grow a small church. One of those things that we're going to spend a lot of time looking at is how to identify and utilize the unique strengths of your church. That small churches have strengths. Each church has its own unique identity. It has its own unique DNA. A lot of times, these small churches are a very close knit community, and they have a specific heartbeat, things that they're passionate about, things that they love to do. And if, as leaders, we can identify those strengths in our church, even in a small church, even in the smallest of churches, and we can use those strengths, the things that we're already doing well, instead of trying to reinvent ourselves, discover what
Right.
it is that we already do well, and use those skills, those passions, those abilities to attract and retain our members that we currently have, but also engage our community and be an influence and an impact in our community around us. That's a great starting point for many small churches.
Right. Being able to identify those people is really a big deal. And then to engage them, like Tony said, to get them involved in it. And the other thing you're going to find in many of the small churches is they're family churches. And that's a different dynamic as you
Yeah, it
work
is.
with them. And one of the ideas I would have for you, if as you're preaching to a family church, is identify who the real leaders are. Work with the leaders, and in getting your planning and getting your things going, and then from there build out. But you need to get that. You need to look at where the leader is and identify that leader. The other part is, if you've got a leader, a potential leader, give them ideas and let them bring the idea before the rest of the people. You don't have to champion. You don't have to fight for that idea, but you also don't have to take credit for it. They can take credit for it, and the things move on, and it's not just about you.
Right.
And so I think the whole thing, a lot of times for us, it's just about me. Oh, poor me! I don't have any leaders. Or, oh, look at this, they won't do what I say they do. Well, why don't they do that? Try to work with them and realize that you're part of a team, and that there's no I in team. I've had coaches tell me that before when I was trying to shoot the basketball all the time,
But
and
there is
not
an
not
M and an
pass it.
E.
Pardon?
There is an M and an E.
There's an M and E, and I never got to spell that very well.
Yeah, I think that there's everyone has something that they're passionate about. And so it's identifying what the people in your church are passionate about and setting them free to lead in that passion, in that love that they have. One of the things that I'm excited to talk about in this podcast in a future episode is the dreaded M word for churches, and that's marketing. That churches,
Yep.
especially small churches, hate the idea of marketing and don't even know where to begin. But having an effective outreach and evangelism strategy for your church is critical to seeing success. It's if you want to grow, if you want to reach new people, not just numerically but spiritually, you have to have a strategy in place for how you're going to reach new
Right.
people. You can't just expect people to walk through your doors. There has to be a strategy for how you're going to do that. Are you going to host community events? Are you going to partner with other organizations? What's your marketing strategy going to be to get the word out about who you are and what you're doing?
It all begins, I think, with a website. If you're doing that, I find that most people, when they come to a church today, they've looked at all the churches in the area on the internet, and they have an idea who you are before they ever get there. What's your webpage say to people about who you are and what you like, and why what you'll be appealing for them to come to your church?
Yeah, and we'll have an episode of our small church podcast that will dive just in to websites for small churches on a limited budget with limited skills. You know, we probably don't have a lot of small church pastors out there that are fluent in HTML and coding and website design. So what are options there when it's another hat that a small church pastor has to wear, is managing the church's marketing, the church's website, the church's
Right.
social media? What are the options to make that as quality and easy as possible? So look forward to diving into that, and we'll have experts in the area of web design that'll come in and talk to us about that and give some great options for churches to really up their reach in marketing.
Well, Tony's done this a great deal of the time in his life. He really is good at doing this, and we can give you some practical tips on it. and help you. But I just know that is an important factor. And then the other thing is, how do I reach out to bring people to church? What do I do there? We'd
Yeah,
like to.
marketing doesn't do any good if you get the people in and you don't do anything with them.
Right.
And that's key to growing a small church. And we will spend numerous episodes discussing how do you create a culture of discipleship within your small church.
Right.
Uh, you have to have that, because in so many small churches, with it being family centered churches, with it being more of a more of just something to do, that you come in, you check it off your list. It's part of what you do is you go to church. And so you come in, you sit down, you stay for your hour, you say hello to your friends, your family, and then you all run off to lunch at Cracker Barrel after the service is over.
And at that point, sometimes some people don't do that because they're so worn out because they've been doing all the work. So making sure that you have people sharing those loads, getting out and doing some of the responsibility that goes on during the service, during the week, so that they're not all borderline kind of candidates for a nursing home somewhere.
Bruce, we're not only going to talk about strategies for growth in small churches, but we're going to spend a lot of time over the coming weeks, months, and hopefully years discussing how small church leaders can navigate through difficulties that arise in their small church. You have a quote that you've said many, many times that I use a lot, and I stole it straight from the great Bruce Montgomery. It's whenever two or more gather together, conflict will arise.
Yep.
And inevitably, in small church leadership, you are going to have difficulties. One of the things that you specialize in, and we've had the opportunity to go and meet with several churches and help them deal with conflict, but how do you deal with conflict in the church? And I think conflict in the small church is even more unique and maybe difficult than in a larger church, because the conflict is felt by everyone. When there's conflict in a small church, everyone feels the conflict. And so I'm looking forward to hearing from you in future episodes and other people that we'll bring in on how to handle conflict within the church.
Yeah, withdrawal isn't the answer. So you're going to have to learn how to handle things that are difficult. And actually, we're not going to go into it today, but think about what does Scripture say about conflict. Look that up to be ready for a later episode where we can talk about those kind of things. But what does Jesus say, and how does Jesus handle conflict? It's there. There's a lot of communication things in the Bible if we just look for them and listen for them when they're there.
There really is. I'm looking forward to diving into that with you in a future episode. One of the big difficulties that small church leadership faces, and we've touched on this already, is balancing all of the different hats that you wear. That small church leaders, you have to be the pastor, you have to be the administrator, you have to be the counselor, you have to be the teacher. And it can be very challenging to balance all of those, especially if you're in a church that you're not full-time, that you're bivocational. How do you be all of those things while at the same time trying to work another job to support your family? That can be incredibly difficult. We're going to have several bivocational ministers in with us to discuss how they manage that and how they deal with the difficulties of being bivocational and juggling several different responsibilities, numerous responsibilities that they have in their small church leadership.
Right. Bivocational or not, it can be overwhelming.
Absolutely.
The amount of hats you do wear, you don't oftentimes take them off, and you're putting on more at the same time. So you've got to find a way, or you wear yourself out. And in your family is important. You need to really give them the attention that they need. I listened to Elton Trueblood. He was a Quaker author, writer, many years back, and he was talking about putting your wife first. And people said, well, how do you do that? I'm going to give you a simple thing to do. Do all of you keep calendars and have a schedule of what you're going to do? If you do, then you put your wife in on Thursday night. You're going to go to dinner with the family during this. And so somebody says, well, can you come over to the house Thursday night? I've got a problem. Well, I've got an appointment. I could come Friday. I could come Wednesday. What makes your wife or your family member less important than a church member? So that's when you talk about the amount of hats you wear, you've got to take them off at some point in time for the family's sake and for your sake. Take them off. Do those things. Honor those. Put those things in your calendar ahead of time so that you can just simply say, and you're not lying, I've got an appointment.
So, Bruce, would you say, and this is diving in a little bit more to this, but something that you just said intrigued me there. Would you say with the hats, the many different hats that you wear, is husband, mother, father, wife, son, daughter, friend, is that a hat that you also wear, or is that just who you are, and that is your skin? It's not necessarily a hat that you're taking on and off, but it's who you are at all times, and everything has to filter through that.
That's a good insight. I really do believe it is who you are, and if you don't learn that, your family will not survive. It's family, your wife. They come first. People may be shocked that I would say that they come before church, but if they're not happy and you're not functioning as a family unit like God designed you to function, how's the church going to do it? You're going to be so distracted by what's going on at home that you're not going to be able to deal with the things in church effectively. So that, I guess I would say it's DNA, but it's also one big hat. I'm dad, or I'm a father, I'm a mother of a family, and that we never take that hat off.
Yeah. The difficulty comes that in many small churches, they view your family as an extension of you. Mm-hmm. They view the pastor's family as an extension of the pastor, and therefore employees of the church as well. And so if the pastor is there, they expect the pastor's family to be there. And if the pastor's family is there, they expect them to be active participants in what is taking place, which can add even more stress and strain onto not only the pastor, but obviously their family as well. And coping with the stresses of small church leadership is something that we're really going to spend a lot of time dealing with, because small church leadership, I think, is in many ways even more stressful than large church leadership because of the lack of resources, because of the lack of help, because of the amplified magnification of every little thing that happens. Everyone notices and scrutinizes everything that you do. And so taking care of yourself mentally and emotionally, how to deal with stress, how to avoid burnout, how to confront the demands of leadership, the difficult interpersonal dynamics that take place in church leadership. We're going to spend a lot of time with expert guests talking about coping strategies, how to prioritize self-care, how to seek support from other leaders, mentors, and professionals, and setting realistic expectations for yourself and for your church to make sure that you're taking care of yourself.
Right. Even in doing that, have one of your leaders honestly monitor are you spending enough time with your family? Maybe you won't recognize that, and help from a leader saying, do this, even though you're feeling the pressure, but it's got to be there, and you've got to do it. And I don't know any other way to do it except ways I've told you already, is to schedule, is to think about family. And I always also tried to make it clear when a church hired me to be the minister that they had to pay me one salary, but if you have my wife, you had to pay me 3 times as much. She works harder than I do.
I love that. Yes, you got a good one there with Carol.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Bruce, I think that we have covered a lot of different things today. We've spent a lot of time talking on what to expect in the Small Church Podcast. We've talked about understanding small church leadership, building a strong foundation for small church leadership, how we're going to discuss strategies for growing a small church, and we're going to spend a lot of time over the course of the life of this podcast navigating the difficulties in small church leadership. For Bruce Montgomery, I'm Tony Marr. We want to thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of the Small Church Podcast. We'll be back next Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. with a new episode for you. And we look forward to speaking with you then. If you have questions or comments or want to find out more about how you can get help, please visit higherministries.com. Have a great rest of your week.